Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with the 2MK team. Today we are looking at our Hitomi bot. Last week we looked at the basic bot concepts using base as a character. We will not be reviewing that today. If you would like to see that, or to get sort of a preview of base and DOA bots to go with Hitomi bot, who is the first, and those two being the next in sequence, please go to our YouTube or channel and go back a little bit, find the base concepts, and work from there. There is one correction to be made in that stream, or rather for that stream. In the base section at the beginning of that stream, I mentioned that his first recording ended in a quarter circle forward, punch, and it should have actually ended in a quarter circle back and punch. This does affect what you will be seeing on the screen in that stream, but because of the way base flows in general, it was not really a problem relative to describing the actual bot or its functions, and for the most part only changed its rhythm somewhat. We are going to get into the discussions of rhythm changes today, but overall we are looking at Hitomi bot purely, both in terms of what she's for and how she's supposed to help you, and similar things. This will therefore follow our normal Disc Guidance stream, where we talk a little bit about why the character is this way, what we want her to do, and how she's meant to help you, and then only then go into talking about inputs and special things that can make your life easier or harder. Hitomi as a character in this game is mostly using a lot of variation in her strikes to get advantage on the opponent. She was probably chosen as one of the basic characters because of the understanding that karate users would have. There is some helpfulness in being able to use fighting styles you are either familiar with or can easily visualize. Because she focuses relatively heavily on finding the right strike to stop you, our Hitomi bot was chosen as the first one in order to teach you how to hold. And to some extent, minor things about defense in terms of attacking throws. She's also relatively easy to get used to, but still has a pace that will mean that if you aren't necessarily feeling too confident or good at the game, you can fight back for a while like this, get her to a space and you like practice some combos, see the sort of things that happen to you when you're fighting normally, while still being able to get some of the hold practice in, making her a good bot to just train against when you don't know what else to do. And she's interestingly kind of difficult to input, but only in the sense of getting used to it, meaning that the more you use her, the more you'll get used to putting in her various recordings, and the faster you'll be able to get started every time you train with her. She also has some of the more, at least slightly more deceptive buttons in this game in terms of where things are. Like, relative to quick buttons, most characters have misleading buttons in the slower department. Hitomi has a few that, if you aren't familiar with the game, count as misleading in the quick department. And continue to be so for a while, similar to Zack and to some extent Momichi, who is just out. She also has a predictable enough rhythm that most people would be tempted to try to do things by guessing. But as a character, she has enough variation that we were able to take at least some of that out. there's nearly nothing she does that you have a 100% success rate on except the very easiest thing, and the one that will be at the basis, the easy version of the point system, which we will get to in a bit. So as you can see, she can be very punchy, but the punches are not in themselves too difficult to see coming. As with most of the easy bots, you can use this stage, or if you prefer muscle, or sweat as they call it, you can use those as well, but they're a little less viscerally helpful in terms of getting used to a specific thing about it. This is because of the other side of the point system, which again will be mentioned in a bit. Finally, Hitomi has enough highs, lows, and mids to really cause problems. And as you've just seen, she is able to execute both low and mid holds. Or is it high? No, it's low and high holds that she has so that you don't end up spamming anything on those levels that make you feel more comfortable. This is also to help people who are getting used to 3D games from the basic principles of 2D games to get past one particular hurdle. Namely, getting used to holding back for basic defense instead of down back is important to learn and important to keep in mind. Even if you already understand it, switching games, it's a little helpful to have something to quickly remind you in the hard method, just to get your muscle memory back in order. Finally, even if you don't have a strong interest in fighting her as a bot for helping you learn holds, she moves and shifts around at almost exactly a rate that helps you get perfect long-range attacks and understand what you can do in terms of throws and combos more than most of the other bots. She has decent range of her own, long-ish range on her kicks. When you make mistakes, she's likely to hit you. And she ducks through things often enough, for example, that you can't just go for her head whenever you want. So, based on that, let's go into inputs. Once again, DOA bots do not show off the inputs. You're going to have to know that you did them right. Fortunately, this game is not one where it's super difficult to do this. And of course, our information will be as clear as possible on our bot page when the bot is released to let you know exactly what to expect to see when you get it correct. There is a lot of leniency on this bot. In fact, not all of the things she does are even directly required to function, which is good because her replay number 1 is quite long and it's fairly annoying unless you've gotten used to it. Hitomi's action 1 should look like this mostly when repeated. And you should probably be able to sidestep a little bit. It's a reasonably simple input with some hidden parts. You cannot really leave out the hidden parts, but you can change what they are to make them more comfortable for you in most cases. The problem is that mostly you have a limited number of things you can change it to. What exactly that means, if you're not familiar with bots, is basically that during the animation of one button, you press a different one, and when the bot's rhythm changes, when you block certain things, or when it plays from one into another, it will play something different. What we care about here, though, is that this actually does look the way it's supposed to when you record it. This input is 5K, i.e. standing kick, completely neutral. 5H plus K, which is hidden, and you should nearly never see. Punch Punch, which causes her to go from the 5k into that multi-strike you're seeing. It only requires 2 punches to do this, as far as we can tell. But beyond that, there are some other things that need to happen, even more hidden. She also needs, after that, 7-8 so that she has her high hold. Up back hold, that is. Directly after that, 9k up forward kick. Another move that you're basically never seeing. This can become 6k and sometimes be okay, but you really need to try for the 9k. If you are finding yourself having trouble with the 9k, it is irrelevant enough to most blows that you can leave it out. But you need to pause a little bit after the 7H, either way, so you might as well hit something. And you shouldn't hit punch. Mostly because the thing that follows it is another 5 PP. And then you just end the recording. So, from the top, 5k, 5H plus k, 5 PP, 7H, optionally 9k, 5 PP again. This is quite long. You should probably practice doing it. Most bot inputs are not this long, and if you're used to seeing them from our last stream, they will mostly seem much easier. This one is at least a good sequence and has a lot of stuff that can be done without holding any directions. Still, make some effort to get yourself coordinated with this. If absolutely necessary, you can leave off the direction for the hold as well, but this will affect how the bot flows. But if you're in a rush and you're familiar with the bot, it probably won't take anything much out of you if you just do almost the whole thing without hitting any directions at all. Her recording 2 is a little more complicated. It starts with a throw, specifically 4T, 4 throw. You're pressing back throw. As her forward throw switches sides and you want to stay in this space. From there it is 5k, 6k, and the 6k is the little knee you're seeing. 3P, which is not common, but you just saw it, tends to only hit you if the other K hit, as in made contact. But sometimes she gets it out the other way, depends on her rhythm. And then 6-6, forward dash. You don't have to hide this forward dash, it's not terrible if you do or don't. But she does a good job if you have the speed for this. You don't have to go too fast either. But it is important to make sure to get that forward dash in on the end or her rhythm tends to be a little off, so you should make some effort with that one. Once again, 4 throw, 5k, 6k, 3p, 6-6, and end. While it feels relatively complicated to input at first, this is mostly in the first 3 inputs, and once you've gotten used to that, you're generally golden and can proceed. Finally, her third recording is her simplest one, and a little bit optional. You can change around a couple of things, but not too many. This is a 4P, 1H, 1T, let me restart that, actually. 1H, or 1T. In this case, the thing that really matters more so is whether or not the player wants to have to deal with her doing throws to punish them when they crouch, or to deal with different types of hold. So, the main thing you need to understand is that she will use 4P, which is the move you're seeing there. And then in there, you can hide 2 inputs before you press the required ending, 1K. This is probably a better way to explain this. The 4P is required at the beginning. The 1K is required at the end. The 2 inputs that go in the middle can vary based on your expectations of yourself, but they can't be too long. We suggest putting just a hold and probably a throw. You can see that she actually does certain other flows, specifically going from the 1K into a punch, but that punch is a follow-up to her 1K and not specifically a thing you should ever see when you're initially inputting it. In fact, it's basically that because this is replaying into itself that you are seeing that punch that follows the 1K. And if I crouch to block the 1K, I will get hit by that move because it is a mid. Now you have plenty of time to hold it, and plenty of time to block correctly instead, and so on, but it's just something to note and something helpful for learning. Similarly, if you crouch blocked all the time and got hit by the 4P, nothing much should happen to you for that. She should go into probably a hold. But it could be a throw, depending on how you did the 2 middle inputs. What you are seeing now is 4P hidden 1T, 4H, 1K. So in this demo, she does not actually have a low hold. You can give her a low hold by using 1H instead, and this may make it more dangerous depending on the timing. If you have a hidden 1 hold, it can help against certain characters. If you're a character that often hits lows when people are trying to hit you in strings, it might help to discourage you. But in this case, I hid the 1T in it because partially it makes it easier, and partially it's easier to understand. The sequence is also important. Since the 1T goes first, it is hidden in the punch, and basically will nearly never happen. Crouching throw is not a thing you're going to see from this bot a lot. Later on in the stream, we are going to change this input, just to show off how inputs are done, and to show how much it can change a bot's rhythm. So for now, just remember, the important things are 4P, 2 inputs in the middle, preferably just hold and throw, and 1K at the end and end the recording. So with that, we'll turn all of these on and start to discuss the aim and point system of the bot. DOA bots do not have the capacity to set your health to not recover. And honestly, given the way they do damage and the amount of damage done, you might not want this. Meaning you have to find a way to keep track of whether or not you are doing well enough winning or losing on your own. Helps you keep in mind if whether or not your opponent has a particular set of plans. So you can consider it to be the equivalent of that. Learning to understand when your opponent has done a certain thing a certain number of times successfully and therefore might want to do it again is actually a very large part of fighting games, and it's a much larger part when it comes to games like DOA, because tendencies and spacing are so much more important to all of the interactions. The most important thing actually, therefore, is to understand where the Hitomi points come from. Unlike our other bots where we normally reserve a specific point system, usually D, for those few bots that have this. So far, since there is no way to cause the health to go down that we're aware of, they're all going to have some win condition, and once they've succeeded that win condition a certain number of times, then you start over the count of your own points because they have functionally won. In a real match, basically it means that your opponent will have done their winning condition more often than you have done yours. In Hitomi's case, it is simply punching you into the wall, which is why we use this stage. Side-on glances are not really required, and if you're playing on the easier mode mentally, her doing it twice in succession doesn't mean anything. Reaching the wall was originally going to be the point, but it's not necessary here, and it is harder to keep track of and judge for yourself. So, instead of a matter of reaching the wall, we're using that move you just saw. The I am going to punch you repeatedly and send you flying, because this move will knock you into the wall directly. If you are out of position, therefore, you get a very obvious point for Hitomi. All the rest of the time, she's just hitting you normally, and you get lots of chances to do things. If you want it to be harder, you have to worry about her throw as well, but that is really hard, and that brings us into the rest of the point system anyway. So with that out of the way, that Hitomi gets a point for hitting you with that move into the wall, and you can be kind to yourself and not give her the point if she does it basically twice in a row. But we do suggest giving her points for any other time she manages it. She does have one or two other ways to knock you into the wall. Mostly we did not give her moves that have this function, but you know, think about it. Especially as you get better at it. Your main goal then is to hold Hitomi's moves. Functionally, if you're playing on the easy difficulty, as we will classify it, you just count something, just hold everything, figure out how to hold any given thing, and get a point each time you manage a hold. She's confusing enough to beginners that holding things is hard, and the 4-way holds in this game mean it was already difficult. You can just block, and because she will generally not knock you into the wall if you just block, this is an easy way to get away from this. But you do get pushed back easily, and other weird things start to happen. Your hope, let's say if you wanted to start off there, is to learn some defense. And eventually, recognize when she's definitely going to go for the kick for that move mentioned, and probably mid-parry out of it. So you get kicked in the head, not that one, this one, and you see there's a punch coming right afterwards. You can hold that punch and submit. There are some specific difficulties of the timing though, and that is another thing the bot is meant to help you learn. We will get to that a bit more later when we start to talk about more advanced options and more advanced understanding to go with them. But overall, your goal is just to hold anything she throws at you and give yourself a point for holding it. You already have enough to worry about as she uses high kicks, a close range mid kick, mid punches, low kicks, multi-hit moves, and often throws you when you're doing other stuff. The more technical version of the point system is you get a point for holding things separately, and this is important because at the higher difficulty levels points start to disappear, namely that one. This is the easiest hold. This is just the mid-punch hold. Back and hold. It counters not that many things she does. She actually does approximately an equal number of things that will hold as everything else. But she also specifically does more obvious things. For example, if you block her low kick, or even she whiffs it, she has at least a chance of going into a move that can be held like that, and you have a lot of time for that hold. Her high kick is similar. If you mistime the hold or put it in the wrong direction, you'll get into some trouble. But overall, it's the easiest point to get, and as you'd expect, it is also the first point you stop getting. If you go up to a medium difficulty, you're still best off holding that move and any other mid strikes because it prevents that from happening. But you don't get points for doing it anymore. Your aim then is to get points for holding her low kick, which is not generally that difficult. But it's not the easiest move to see coming. And by the time you do see it coming, at first, you may not be ready to react to it yet. You can't just base on seeing her move her leg, for example. Much of this bot is about recognizing that you don't actually have time to recognize certain things. But that is, Kasumi at least, the version of the hold of the low kick. It's perfectly fine to even look at her inputs, figure out what should come after what most of the time. She is generally set so that there is no move that she does other than the high kick, and even that to some extent, where you know exactly what will follow it. You can get really used to certain things, but teaching yourself to hold properly is about understanding how quickly you have to input these defensive options and knowing exactly what is coming, or at least feeling it out enough to do the right thing. That, for example, is the hold of her high kick. Which is the third point. I.e., eventually you should get used to blocking her or holding her low kick enough, because she tends to do it after a certain thing, that you should probably be able to catch it most of the time. You can probably see it there. There is a moment where she goes for a hold after, let's say, her mid-punch, where you can probably assume that the low kick is coming. What you cannot do is assume that just because you've seen a hold, that the low kick must be coming. She does have more than one way to do it. But you can learn sequences, and it's important to be able to learn sequences, even if this is not super helpful facing people who do mix-ups. You have to crawl before you can walk, and making sure that you understand exactly what is coming next is super important. Similarly, if she hits you with the mid-punch, the timing may change such that she never does the move. So you can get used to the idea, but it won't be that reliable. And the fourth point is simply to tech her throw, as I have just blatantly not done. You can in fact hold her mid-kick, the close-range move, but this is basically unreactable, so you'd have to, one, figure it was happening, and two, get used to the fact that holding those is a forward hold instead of a back hold. You can consider that the advanced part of this, but there is no system in which you get points for doing it. It's just something else to add to make yourself good at the game. Once you've gotten used to holding all the other things, you can try to do this, but again, she really doesn't have a timing where she specifically does it. She could whiff a throw maybe, but this is unlikely. And this is basically the only time she does this move. She's reached the end of a string, and you see it there. You might get to see it after a couple of punches at whiff, for example. But even then, there's no specific reason she must do that one. Which gets us into the concept of bot-based mix-ups. Without going too much into the theory of starters and enders and why they do certain things, understand simply that anything she does at the end of one recording has the potential to do other things when it flows into a different recording. Similar to what we mentioned for her action 3, where the only way she does that second upward punch that hits mid after her no kick is when it replays into itself. That move. Similarly, she has other follow-ups to her no kick. Specifically, she can throw you, or do the axe kick style one you've just seen. So when you see her low kick, if you happen to block it, you cannot say with any certainty which of these three things is coming. Meaning if you hold at all, you may get thrown. The timing for all three of these things is different, and the kick itself is actually a kind of overhead high thing. This means that you are primed to fall into one of the main traps people get into when first learning to play this game. Reacting to the last thing that happened with your hold because you were too slow, and then doing it again. Or holding and then trying to hold again because you think you have enough time. Holds actually have enough recovery that if you failed a hold, you should block. And that's one of the first things Hitomi teaches you as a character. Because she will almost always manage to hit you after you have failed a hold. She will almost always be in a state where you have no idea what is coming. She throws often enough that there's basically no way out of it. And even if you failed to hold triple punch, you can't hold in the middle of the move very easily. That is basically a special move equivalent for those who play 2D games. Functionally, a true block strength. You cannot actually, as far as we can tell, hold having blocked the first hit of that move. You can block the first hit, you can hold the first hit. But I am basically locked out from performing a hold if I did not hold the first of the hits. Super important to understand about certain characters' moves. They look like combos, but this does not mean that they're actually treated as combos that you can hold out of. You just may not be given the option at all because of the speed of the attack. It is actually a large part of Hitomi's strength that she has moves that are like this that you can't easily tell from each other. And it's not actually that common an ability. It mostly comes from her, Ayane, and Zack. And even Zack, he more so depends on the idea that they look like that when most of us are not. Whereas she has a legit number of them where you, even if you blocked it as a glancing blow in passing, you cannot actually block it. You cannot actually hold it in the middle. Meaning you're likely to try to hold something else. It's super important to learn not to hold the last thing she did. It's super important to try not to flinch when you shouldn't be holding at all because of a failure. One of the main things to learn, therefore, is to block and then hold. And she does have just enough in her arsenal of things that are probably happening that you should be able to learn to do this eventually. But she should still have mostly something akin to mix-ups, or in the few cases where she does not, when you block, it's most likely she's going to do a hold or a throw of her own, and you won't hold anything with it. You can use this to practice to get your own throws, or sometimes it will cause you to tech hers, which is just as useful, as that is the last point. Point system D is basically hold tech Hitomi's throws as mentioned, but often you'll end up throwing her instead as a result of trying this, and when you realize that you have gotten high counter throw, sorry, it means you did it wrong. You can decide whether or not to go with this being meaningful or not. There are no points in the bot system for throwing her, but it is a good marker for the fact that you're just spamming throw and not doing this correctly. Mainly, obviously you didn't tech a throw, but if you're mashing too much, she will often be holding at the moment you're throwing, which in this game makes her take extra damage and gives you the high counter throw marker that comes up in blue on your side of the screen. Like that. Similarly, you see on her side of the screen when you went for a hold at a point in the sequence where she was able to throw you. Since throw is the start of one of hers, this functionally is not something you can do anything about. It's mostly that the throw itself is a mix-up for the person who is guessing too much at what is happening next. You can use this bot for a long set of training. Unfortunately, as mentioned in last stream, DOA does not even save bots between character changes, so you're really not very lucky there. Fortunately, she is also specifically quite lenient as mentioned, and if you input her repeatedly, you should still get something useful. Now, because of the complexity of DOA bots and the inability to change easily, we have been putting them in at the start of streams before, so you don't actually see the process. But this in particular is a game where it's a little bit more helpful to show it. And we've definitely been through enough with this bot so far that I would expect people to be able to say, okay, well, we can see most of its rhythm. And if not, you could probably refresh or replay, especially if you're watching on YouTube later. Mute me and go back and just watch her for a while, because we're about to try to change her rhythm, and it can end up changing her rhythm quite a lot. Despite her leniency, I expect this to take a couple tries from my side, because once again, if you are doing things correctly, it's difficult to know whether or not something is working, as the game simply doesn't show you enough. There is no way to view the inputs on that side to tell how well you got it done. So we're gonna have to go in blind, literally. But we are going to go ahead and attempt to change the before-mentioned Action 3. And we're going to turn off these two replays so we can look at just Action 3 when the time comes. Once again, it was a 4P to start and a 1K to end, and what was in the middle was not as important. The current version has a 1T and a 4H in it. We're going to stick to something similar to that because of the character, and again, we don't really have time to put in everything all over again on stream, but we are going to shift one aspect of this. Rather than putting in a 4H, we're going to put in a 6H, and we're going to put that 6H after the 4P instead. We will also put in probably... Let's check actually. Let's check now what a good option for Hitomi's throw would be, since we're going to erase this anyway while we're doing the rest of the recording. What would be a useful throw for her to have after this move? She stays at about this distance, so you can't just do nothing. In optimal situations, the bot should be doing this move from fairly far away and leaving her at about this distance. Even if she does it from close, you're still sort of close, but she doesn't tend to do it in that flow, and you don't generally want to stand that close to her. So let's look for something that will be effective even at max range. Her stand throw seems to be effective even then, so we could use that. But there is a range at which she starts to whiff it. It seems that it's fairly far out though, so if you want to just use, say, stand throw because it's easy to do, no real reason to stress yourself about that on that side. This is her quarter circle forward throw as far as I'm aware. Let's try forward throw and see if we get that. No. So forward throw is this, and quarter circle forward throw is even more fabulous. But we're mainly looking for any throw, more or less, preferably one that leaves her in front, leaves the opponent in front of her, so she can continue to push them to the corner. Therefore, let's go 4P, 6H, some throw, 1K. And in this case, I'm going to switch sides, make it a little bit easier. Recordings can be done in this way. Again, should probably check the last stream, but this stream is one that should have a little bit of explanation in it. Com recording, you can press forward instead of X to get here, just to keep your mind on the right side of the controller, to be using your left hand basically. And forward again to get to this part of the navigation. You do, however, have to hit X to start the recording, and depending on your button config, this might be a little bit strange. Either way though, we're about to use 4P, 6H, throw, 1K. You must record from the moment you hit the button. Unfortunately, as you can see, the red bar that shows that you are recording starts without you actually pressing anything else. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any way to solve this either. So you have to think of the X button as the first hit in the combo that you're doing. Of course, unlike Eunice, if you've come from that experience with bots with us, this doesn't seem to lose other inputs or cause problems when you just leave this here for a while. So you do get to mess around with it, you do get to try to get used to the required inputs for P, 6H. That sort of thing. You can get used to it first, but do of course remember that the stressor here is that you can't catch your breath or anything. You have to go straight from this screen to fully input. Now at that speed, I believe it was correct. So the 1K is probably in there. And we're going to replay it. Note that if you leave this screen in any other way, it will continue the recording at where you left off, which is a relatively strange function that I think they might change soon. But one way or another, you have to be careful to actually switch this to replay if you don't want to risk recording over something just because you actually relax. So we see a 5T here, but there is the kick still, and it's on a rhythm timer now, so you're probably okay. what we have is now the capacity for her to just do a standing throw in a different part of it. It's not hidden the way the hold was, so you're now able to tech her throw a lot more often if you got spammy about it, but she is also much more likely to actually deal with you in that way. So with that minor change, we're now going to go back to looking at the bot in totality. All inputs are on. Since it was already on replay, I don't have to do anything. She'll just move now. I wanted to use a different throw, specifically so you could tell them apart, but standing throw in this case is a different throw, so you can get an idea of when she's doing one versus the other. This is actually more effective for training. It's a little bit harder in that once you get hit with the mid-punch, that long karate chop style attack to the midsection, different things happen. You can also see something more interesting though. Because of the amount of time it took to end the recording, she doesn't actually combo the low kick into her overhead kick, and that is one of the points of leniency we were discussing before. You do have to be fairly quick with these recording endings. In fact, part of the reason the original was chosen is because it's easier to see when it's working correctly. When I change it back, it'll explain why a bit more, but the short version is that the player is more likely to wait until the end of an animation to do something, to be sure of themselves. And since the 1K is not animated in this case, it's a bit harder to feel comfortable with it, and you're likely to end the recording a bit later. The issue with this is that the chop you've just seen has a timing where you can easily see it. But it is also a good way to use something to help you understand what teching throws even feels or looks like if you haven't gotten that experience before. So you can see the punch coming, recognize the correct punch, know that that punch will always be followed by the throw, and tech your way out of it. So it's a good learning experience if you want to use that version. You also will tend to get thrown a lot, but it doesn't teach you as much about holds. You can also use this to learn about what happens when you take a hit and then try to throw or mistime the throw tech or something like that. You can, as you've just seen, for many characters, still tech out of a throw even though you were recovering from a hit when the opponent grabbed you. However, most of us do this by expectation, as in we think we're about to get thrown, so we hit the button. This game's timing for that is a little bit tighter, somehow. Mainly because you won't tend to throw the opponent as easily in those situations, for various reasons. But this one was important to show off, because if you mess around with the timings too much, you should really know what's going to happen here, and this version gets the final point, specifically just teching her throw, to be easy enough that it doesn't really count anymore and would need to have the point system rearranged. I.e., if you're using that variation, the hardest thing to hold actually becomes something else, specifically her high kick, because she will no longer do it as often due to various interactions, and you can't see it coming. This will be on the page on our website, toon-nk.org, when Hitomi Bot is released in full this Sunday. And of course, you can learn by putting in other options, but because the game does not necessarily have so many different things that characters do, you might not be able to do too much. One of our suggestions is to use these middle spaces to get used to her other moves. And in many cases we have a space in these bots. In others we would normally devote an entire input to just, oh, if you need to change this, go ahead and change this to that. In this game we cannot afford this. So you're going to see more this starter, this ender, their single buttons, change what you want in the middle sort of thing going on. This also, of course, lowers the amount of time she actually does the low kick, as she spends more time throwing you. So overall, it's not a useless thing, it just changes the difficulties and the setups for the difficulties. The 6. H that I put in is probably just hidden, it's nearly never going to do anything. It's there both to help with the timing and because whenever you find yourself with a space where you just need to put something in there, the least confusing thing you can do for yourself is put a hold. Mainly because it allows you to hold out of certain attacks, especially if they pressed 4P and happen to be still blocking because you were hitting them and were blocking up until that point for some reason. Mostly she will not be, but she does occasionally block. And when she does, you'd prefer if she had a good option out of that block. Specifically before, therefore, and the one we technically should use is 4P, 1T, 4H, 1K, as mentioned before. Hopefully I made that clear enough before. The reason is simply that if you are doing a combo, the highest chance of the button that goes into the middle of your combo in a timing that Hitomi might actually hold should be probably a mid-punch. In this case we've made it so it is a mid-kick, but even with Kasumi doing this, she doesn't have too many combos where that's the thing she does on the second hit. And with her timing, no matter how many times I do this, it's unlikely that Hitomi is going to hold any of them. And this is even with Kasumi, who can totally delay this a long period. So bear it in mind when you are putting anything in the middle that holds are helpful, but you should probably tilt them toward your own character's best options. One other really obvious option that is super helpful in the game in general, we will show off for a little bit. We're going to change the same recording, but note that this time Hitomi has enough meter that we can use the break hold input at that point. And break hold basically doesn't care, it just is 4S more or less no matter what you're doing. This has the additional helpfulness of being an attack, and it tends to combo into things. So we're going to record this one as 4P, 4S, 1T, or, and I figure this one might be better to show it off, 4P, 1T, 4S, 1K. Now the main reason this is not as helpful is because it is not going to mid-counter when she has no meter, and it just wastes the meter a lot of the time, honestly. So optimally you would actually want to hide this in the first, but let's show off what it does when you don't. So once again, 4P, 1T, 4S, 1K. That was a 4K, so we try again. I think I hit 4K again. So, one more time. There may have been one or two overcut presses there, but let's see what it is at least. So this is a little more helpful. But we don't see the 1K, so we have to turn on other inputs to see if it's even in there. And the quote-unquote problem here is that as noted, it combos out of things, it doesn't put in the right amount of flow, and so on. But the other throw should be mostly gone. And you should be only seeing that one now. Now she has enough meter, but now the move is in a combo. This is another useful special thing for the special button. As far as we're aware, if you were already in a combo, even if it could have done the hold, it has no reason to do so and therefore won't. You could of course, however, press it very early into that, and you might get something else. This should still work somewhat if she's far enough away in timing. And because it's so effective overall, even though it is not actually a true string, you still have to think about it. But this is a little way to quickly understand why putting in 4S doesn't work exactly the way you'd expect. If you put in 4H at that timing, there's nothing to happen, there's no strike, it will just stop and do a hold. Here, you don't have that option. So instead, we're going to rotate it around again. Once again, more demonstration of how to manipulate the recording to get what you need from it. 4H in that timing is fine. 4S in that timing is not. Meaning that we have to switch where the punch, where the 4S and the throw are. This actually makes the input a little bit easier to deal with, but also makes it so it has to be faster so she doesn't constantly throw you. So at this point we want 4P, 4S extremely quickly, 1T, 1K. Also probably really quickly. So, we'll demonstrate this as best we can and get closer to the ending of stream. So we are now back to this flow, which is completely natural to her. And we see a different behavior altogether. And I'll be quite honest, I have no idea what that is. The other strike she's doing. It could be an indication that I made an incorrect input. But sometimes the only way to know that is to turn on the rest and see what happens. Once again, hidden inputs such as this one are generally so rare that you wouldn't ever really know what's going on. And this is actually partially why we are describing now which ones are important and actually help, and which ones are likely to cause some problem in some direction that you might not have thought of. So let's, in this case, go with the assumption that I got it wrong in some way. And, while we're at it, might as well test what that was. Maybe I hit something I thought I wasn't hitting? Fortunately, this is, again, fairly easy input. And I doubt this is going to help directly, but we'll see what we get. Looks like the timing is off enough that she doesn't do the kick properly, so we try again. And this is again because you were probably supposed to end after the 1K, and since the game can't show you that you're right as yet, you're probably going to have to just feel it out. Which is actually one of the harder things to do with bots as a general thing. Fortunately for this one, the other easier ways of inputting it are very effective, so you probably only need to change once you've gotten used to inputting it in general. For example there, I feel as if I let that kick animate for too long. But the easy way to check it is to let it play back and see if it will do the second part of the punch. And it looks like it does. In fact, to the point of holding fairly strong advantage as a result of it. But now you can see that we have created a form in which she probably has her 4S, but it is not intrusive enough to cause any problems. Unlike when we would have put the 4H in that spot and been comfortable because she would just do holes and randomly waste time, we have to be a little bit more careful with the 4S, but it's fine overall. However, you can notice that she might still be too slow in terms of comboing the low kick into the axe kick version of it. And since we know she was doing that initially, it can't have anything to do with the other input directly. So while the punch works well because the punch is a different recovery, the kick is not good enough. These little things are things you get used to, and why you need such a clear reference as to whether or not something is input correctly. But you should also use sometimes combinations with the other inputs. These will be mentioned on the bot page to tell you when you've gotten it perfect or not and how to proceed around that. So this time I'm going to try to just trust that crouching kick and not worry about making sure I actually see it visually. Still probably a little too slow. This is something that comes up when you have mentally primed yourself to wait for something visual to happen. And it's very difficult in fighting games in general thing, but it's particularly bad for bots. So do your best to learn not to do it. You might even want to do the input with your eyes closed. I'm not going to do that now, but it is an option you can use. Now, that one causes the same sort of nervousness. Is she going to do that kick at all? Did I hide it too fast? But that's just a matter of replaying and seeing what you get. But there is the kick, so you have something. And you didn't really want this move to always be followed by the kick anyway, so it's not so bad if it's quite fast. Her having some other options is useful. Therefore, let's go to full power and see what she comes up with. She does appear to do the 4S, but it might not be actually as 4S. Let's hope not, because I can't imagine how that would work. But there are different timings for break hold, and understanding them well is another part of the game as a whole. As in the end, all of that was simply to show off why you should or should not use them in particular places, and how best to do so. So don't feel too limited in the third input. Those are more so guidelines given to explain to you why certain things might not be what you want to happen, and interactions with moves that would prevent you from getting something you might think is a good idea. Keep this up for long enough and you will start to see the beginning of her moves instead of just hoping you press the right hold. And even the ones that are not so easy to react to are the ones that generally can be blocked in the right timing and then followed up from. Finally, you can use this sort of thing to learn which of your character's holds, if they have any special ones, are more helpful to your situation. Or just to get used to what your holds do, so you know how precisely to put yourself after it. As one final note to the 4S thing, it is largely likely that the reason it does not work in that way is because the system is reading the punch and considers it to be a marker that you are not trying to break hold. Therefore, you could consider putting the 4S at the beginning of certain things if you wanted to test them, but that is not going to work on this bot. You may see bots in the future with the 4S in it, depending on the strength of the character's S attack. Get good enough at this over time, and even if you won't necessarily be able to consciously do it, and in fact might have more trouble doing it consciously than unconsciously, you may find yourself holding a few things, at least from Hitomi, that you did not think you were going to be able to hold. And probably do it on something very close to reaction. Even just guessing is sometimes enough to get your opponent on the defensive, or even win the round, given that it does a fair amount of damage to do the hold in the first place. Our intention is to release at least 3 bots this weekend. We had some minor technical difficulties last time, so we didn't get the ones mentioned at the end of it. But in a way, it was better because of the specific concepts that we needed to explain in this one. So expect on Sunday around 7 Eastern to see Hitomi Bot, Base Bot, and Diego Bot at minimum, and you will probably get at least some ways on Kasumi Bot, but it does take quite a bit of testing to verify all of these little bits, as everyone inputs these things slightly differently, and the timing could have a relatively large impact. Unfortunately, we do have to re-input bots over and over to do any testing at all, so I guess we will get a lot of data that way. The problem, of course, being that it's harder to get full consistency in terms of monitoring when the bot changes very slightly every time you input it. So it can take longer to get to a consistent build. Once we have got to a consistent build though, we're confident that it will be released, basically not at the same time as the others. Possibly within the week rather than waiting for another Sunday though, as we probably have some inputs to go. We do know and plan that beyond those four free characters, there are different characters that different members of the team own, and if the free characters for a week happen to be those characters, or some character that we've already done, let's say they are too far into the rotation, you'll most likely see those bots. Fortunately, there are a lot of relatively complex ones, Helena, Nito, similar, that are not as likely to be directly important in that way. Base concepts come first, after all. Overall, therefore, I expect that when you see a character in rotation, we will at least be working on the bot for that character. Whether or not we can show it off has to do with purchases and so on. As always, we are attempting to live the property life, to gather information that way. What you get from matchups, what you get from bots. It's all anecdotal experience, but that's all you're going to get for the most part until we get a very, very large amount of data. So, in the end, we hope to release 1 bot a week as we have with other games for a very long time. Possibly 2 if situations go well and one of them is really easy to make. But we're generally going to start with what we expect to be the harder one, so we may not be able to tell you mid-week whether or not 2 bots are coming or 1, and you'll have to be surprised on the Sunday. All bots in question can of course be found at 2-mk.org/DOA6-bots, and bots for our other games can be found at their similar acronyms: SFB-bots, BBFC-bots, Eunice dash bots. The only one that does not match this is Guilty Gear because the Guilty Gear system does not work well for bots, and instead we have a set of exercises using the game's in-game tutorial style to help you out in that game and getting used to it. Hopefully the new Guilty Gear will be a little different, or someone will inform us that we have overlooked the, I would say very obvious, but it's definitely not obvious, way to get the bots to behave the same way in Guilty Gear, so we'll hope for that. But with that repetition of that particular throw, Hitomi has indicated that we have come to the end of our stream for the evening. This has been Rillian, 14 2MK. Good luck with your training, and good night everyone.